Hello and welcome to a new episode with discontinued game reviews. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I was having a bit of a Google session, and I also I was on a group chat about how long people have been playing video games, and I realised, especially for a female gamer, that I've actually been playing video games for considerably longer than most people currently in the gaming community. And I think there's a lot of people that probably don't really understand or know the history of computer games and a lot of the earlier stuff that really laid the foundations for some incredible games going forward. I've played a lot of games. I started gaming in 1988. Back mainly with MS-DOS games. It was before the first Windows was released. It was Microsoft DOS. You had to know a little bit of coding to access things, and there was no everything was backdoor entry. There was no easy desktop point and click opening of things. You had to know where it was installed and write the actual commands of how to enter and find and locate and open the games before you even started playing them. There was also a similar time, there was a lot of gaming going on with cassette tape games, but you still had to load that and you had to find it through the back end in MS-DOS and type through your different file combinations to get to where you needed to go. So there are many games in my history that I've absolutely loved and adored, and because of that I've decided to break this down. I'm going to do this as a series of video games, a series of videos about video games that talk about some of the most influential games for me that I remember as a child growing up with, and have a little bit of a chat about them. So the first video I'm going to be doing the early games. The earliest starts in 1975, which I played actually after a couple more that were released later that I'll talk about in a minute, but I really enjoyed it when I got there. It was definitely not accessible for small children. It was something you needed a good level of reading to play, and this one was Colossal Caves, which is one of the founding adventure games throughout history. This is like the first adventure game. It was later also known as Adventure. The initial release was Colossal Cave. It's also been known as Advent. It was a text-based adventure game. There was no images whatsoever. And you read through, it was almost one of those make your own storybooks, but on PC. So, but it was interactive, so it changed and moved as you did it. You didn't turn pages or find things, and you could try things, and if they didn't understand what you were asking, it would give you an error. And you used a basic language such as walk forward, turn left, look. If you type look, it would tell you what you could see. You could open doors, pick up things, find objects, combine objects to complete your adventure. Now, I never actually finished this game, but I played a lot of it. I was a lot younger when I played it. And it was, if you're into reading, which I was, it was really beautiful for the pictures it painted in your mind of where you were. It wasn't easy because you couldn't see things. You had to remember things. So there would have been, I imagine a lot of older games would have had notepads and been writing things down as they were playing this. But this was a game that was released in 1975, and developed between 1975 and 1977 by a guy called Will Crowther. And it was a completely text-based adventure game. I've got a couple of screenshots for you so you can see what I'm on about. But I just had to mention it as the founding, for me as an adventure game lover, this was the founding adventure game that I'm going to talk about. So moving forwards just over a decade, around a decade, I'm going to move towards the King's Quest series of games. These were probably the first games I ever played. And I was very young, and I had a little notepad, and my parents used to write down certain words like open, look, cupboard, and it was probably what geared me up to learn my early spellings before I even went to school. I was playing on this. And King's Quest, I couldn't find any active graphics for. There has been some re-releases, so I've got some screenshots for you. Some of the later games I'm going to have actual game footage that I found, versions that have been released to play on desktop. And a lot of these now I actually think would make amazing phone games. I think that'd be amazing if some of them did that, because some of them are, I still, even having to play through some of these again, I could sit here and play with. I mean, they're very small games. They can take you less than an hour if you're mildly intelligent and understand gaming, or like me, you remember exactly what you need to do and how you do and solve problems. But a lot of them I really gravitated were the point and click adventure games. So King's Quest series, there was a number of them in the series, and they launched the first one called The Wizard and the Princess in 1980. Now, I joined the series, my favourite game was King's Quest 3, which was released in 1986 and was developed by Sierra, which was one of the big game giants at the time. You could walk around, it was all very flat 2D, very, very highly pixelated characters, just upgraded from stickmen, but not really much. You'll see obviously in front of you, and you could walk around the screen up and down, open cupboards, look at things, combine things, collect things, solve problems. Very, very, very early open world adventure game series, and I've always loved open world games, and it's only when you look backwards you think, where did this come from? My first games, my favourite games, were always open world games, although I've got some platform games coming up as well, which the platform games kind of died away a little bit now, but yes, so King's Quest I absolutely loved. I remember being terrified of the wizard. There was a part on it you had to walk very delicately, because it wasn't like in modern games where you can see and it's 3D and you know where the ground is. On this, sometimes there was a very thin line you had to get your character along. I remember there was one area where you had to walk up this windy path, up a mountain to get to the wizard's house, and if you walked slightly off the path, you fell to your death. And it was really frustrating and difficult to get those lines right, because it's not the easiest thing to control. But I had a lot of fun with that, and they re-released some of the King's Quest stuff, which I've played, actually the Wizard and the Princess re-release. I think I played the second one, and they were still creating them. I need to go back and have a look at that, because I absolutely adored King's Quest. I spent hours of my life as a small child playing that, and annoyed my parents a lot asking for new spellings constantly. But I was probably 4 when I started playing it, and played it for a couple of years. So it definitely, before school, I was learning how to spell and write, and really, I mean, a lot of people, especially back then, thought video games were such a childish waste of space, and there was not really many children playing them. They were all very text-based, so it was a lot of adults playing them. But it really gave me a real skill for problem solving, for finding solutions, which I still have in adult life, and it also encouraged me to learn to read and spell, which, as somebody who's dyslexic, that was a massive starter, really. So moving forward from 1986, I'm now going to move over to the 1990s. And I know I've missed out loads of games here. I've just picked a few out for this video that I have particular love and history with. I'm going to move over to the Commander Keen series. I was obsessed with Commander Keen. I played all of them multiple times. I've completed all of them multiple times. And the first one was Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons in December 14th, 1990. But there were 5 games in total released across the early 90s. One of my favourites was Stranded on Mars, and you got they had a pogo stick. It was so 80s, really. The colours and the sounds, you can see I've got some game footage going on now. A very, very 1980s, early 1990s in style, and very basic arcade sounds going on there. And I mean, a lot of frustration, a lot of it was precision. It was very simple, which makes it difficult, because you've got to get the controls just right. There's not a lot of manoeuvring there for anything going wrong or any difficulties. And I was obsessed with these games. I just love them. And even now, going back, I was sat there and I was playing it for ages before I realised I didn't need that much footage of these games. And I'd highly recommend, actually, the site I've got this from. If I can find it, I will leave it at the end, and you can go and check out some of these games on here. And I'll give you the address for that and a link to it as well. Some of these now, you don't need emulators. You can actually play them live on your desktop on PC, which if you're after something a bit different and you want to go and have a look, highly recommend. So moving forward from Commander Keen, trying to do this in a timeline. We're moving again. It's in the 1990s still. This game I went back to so many times. I remember at the time, the final question, you have to solve 3 riddles, and the final question was, what was the name of the dog from, was it Rawhide? Hey Silver? It was one of the old Western movies. And this was well before Google, and we could never complete it because we'd never seen this programme. And it was such a frustration. I remember when Google came out, I was like, I'm going to go back and complete that. Hugo's House of Horrors, just so I can get the answer to that question and complete the game. And I remember trying to spell the word cupboard, and this was the game that I learnt that on. But nipping on now, I mean, you can see in the game footage, I've half completed the game within 5 minutes. It's such a small game. But back in the day, it was, again, one of the first open world kind of horror games, I suppose. House of Monsters. They've kidnapped your friend and they're doing experiments on them, and you have to rescue them. Very, very simple gameplay. It's again another MS-DOS game. It was designed by Grey Design Associates, and I can't find really anything on them anymore, so I don't know if they were bought out by somebody or who they kind of merged into. Most of the games I like are usually Apogee or Sierra games, but this game mentally stuck with me for a long time. I was a massive horror fan as a kid, so I really loved this game. It was quite interesting. So again, moving forward 1 year, another game I've played multiple times and completed multiple times. This is a game called Crystal Caves. It's a side-scrolling platform game developed and published by Apogee Software, and was with IBM PC at the time. It was released on the October 23rd, 1991. Although it's a platform game, you could, and once you'd enter the level, you had to kind of complete that level. But you could start and complete the levels in any order, which I quite enjoy. So if a level was difficult, you could exit out that level and go back and leave it till later. And again, it's fairly simple ideas. It was more about timing, getting your jumping right, getting your firing right, and a lot of kind of puzzles in this, turning switches, finding keys, trying not to blow yourself up, and not to die, timing certain creatures you'd kill and they'd leave a residue on the floor, and if you touched it you'd lose life, so timing where they were to make sure they weren't in a tricky situation. But I felt Crystal Caves was it was inspired by Commander Keen. I felt a lot of similarities between the two, and it was it was released after Commander Keen, but there's definitely a relation to those games. And again, staying in 1991 for the next 2 games. This game took me ages to find because it's a game called Scorched Earth or Tank Wars, depending where you're searching for it. It was a very, very early PC game, very flat. The graphics were very poor, and it was just one of those, similar to how they still have Solitaire and Minefield and different things currently. It would have been along the lines of that, and you could dip in, and you could play against the computer, or you could play against yourself or other people. You could have friends around playing. You'd all share a keyboard. You could set up which keys you were going to all use, and it was very, very simple. That you had to kill the other tanks, destroy the other tanks, and as you got through, you got points, and you could use those points to buy more and more varying and increasingly interesting bombs, from napalm to nukes to all sorts of things, shrapnel, various things to try and create, get as many points as possible. And you could choose how many rounds you wanted of that. So if you went on for 20, you could play for quite a while. I spent hours and hours and hours playing these games. Absolutely love them, and I'm quite pleased. Again, this is on the MS-DOS games site that I'm going to link at the end and in the description. I'd definitely check out Scorched Earth or Tank Wars. Have a look for those if you just want something to pass the time while you're working, just a short game you can dip in and out of. I really recommend it because this one hasn't got loads of levels. You can choose how many levels you want to play. Very simple game, but back in the day it was really enjoyable. So final game for 1991. I can't not mention this. Another game I've completed and spent hours and hours on was Duke Nukem, and there was multiple releases of Duke Nukem, and even going forward for Nintendo 64 had Duke Nukem games, but the original was 1991, 1st of July 91, and was another Apogee Software release, and it was I know it's 91, but it was still dragging over from the 80s. A lot of 80s vibe going on here. All the characters were usually male. I don't really think I found a female character that wasn't a damsel in distress. So as a young female gamer, there was absolutely nothing that represented me, but I didn't care at that time. I absolutely loved Duke Nukem, running around, blowing stuff up, shooting stuff, problem solving, collecting things. The levels got increasingly difficult as you went on. It wasn't the easiest of games, and future releases had better levels of graphics, better levels of problem solving, a lot more frustration. Another great game, and this again is available on the MS-DOS games with the link at the bottom. Definitely check this one out. Scorched Earth's another one. Any of these with live footage are the ones that I've used that site for. And then the final game I'm going to discuss today, and I'm going to continue this on in future for post 1995, but the final game is 1994, and another Apogee Software game, a game called Hocus Pocus, and I think this is one that really has disappeared into the depths of time, but exactly the same as Duke Nukem, similar to Commander Keen in its day. Hocus Pocus was you played an apprentice wizard, and you went around various levels rescuing things, solving problems. Massive platform game. I couldn't find any live gameplay for this game at all. It seems to have sunk into the history, but another game that I spent a lot of time playing, and really enjoyed with it, and another big adventure game, but more platform. There was no open world in this at all, but absolutely fantastic game. Just got some screenshots for you there. So yeah, these are some of my favourite games going past. Some of the founding fathers of the games we've got now. I mean, I'm playing Red Dead Redemption. I'm playing Ark at the moment, Ark Survival. A lot of these games, the Long Dark and the Outer Wilds and all of these, even Outer Worlds. I mean, these all date back to these original founding games that started everything and were so impactful, and there weren't a lot of them. It was a very new and emerging industry, but I just think the history of gaming is fantastic, and there's so many games out there. If you don't mind the graphics, if you don't mind something a little bit simple, they're very quick games. You can finish them. Not a lot of gameplay, especially now, as you've trained your brain throughout gaming throughout the last few decades. Definitely worth going back and checking out and having a look at. If you've got any questions about any of those or anything that you'd like me to go into, I might do a video at some point on Apogee Software and Sierra Games, and do a little bit of history of those franchises, see where they are now. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share my videos. those. I feel like this is quite a different one to what I've done, and hopefully might be of interest to some of you. So thank you very much for listening.